Hello, this is Fritz-Ay says, and welcome back to A Fall from Grace. I don't remember the last time I covered this VN, being truthfully honest. Victor and Cedric were heading towards some sort of bandit camp, and Lysander was hot on their trails. Yeah, and that Scaredy Pants Bear was hilarious to play, so that was fun. But I don't know if we're going to see too much of the bear. Missed opportunity. But let's see how our intrepid duo is doing, shall we? A crowd of people began to spill out of the old village church, flooding the surrounding graveyard as folks slowly headed to the wooden gate, quietly chattering on their way. The sound of the organ playing a traditional hymn from within the building's walls lent a sense of familiarity and almost stifling mundanity to the scene. It had taken place thousands of Sundays before and would keep occurring thousands of Sundays after this one. The usual small groups of people formed. The same conversations were had, and what's more, the weather was sunny with a pleasant breeze, almost inviting the churchgoers to linger before leaving. A specific individual, to be precise, the coyote who'd been tormenting every thought of his for what was beginning to seem like weeks on end. In fact, his obsession with Cedric had kept on growing each day. The lion would find himself thinking about him from the moment he was awake to the moment he lay his head on his pillow at night to get some rest. He now knew where Cedric was hiding, and it was only a matter of time before he and that wretched fox would be forced to leave the forest they had decided to make their hideout and pass through the town nearby. The very thought of the amount of control the lion had over his former friend's life almost made him shiver with satisfaction. However, there was one pawn he couldn't control, and that was his own parents. It was imperative he should attend Mass with them each Sunday, and all attempts of getting them to visit the church in the town he was staying in were vain. They were animals of habit, and what's more, they would never listen to anything he said. In fact, to Lysander, his mother and father were almost complete strangers, relatives he'd see during the weekend, and perhaps for the occasional game of crochet, if they were feeling particularly sociable. Being the only son, as well as the heir to the largest and wealthiest estate and family fortune in the county, didn't seem to make him special in the slightest in their eyes. His father was a bitter and disillusioned man, and couldn't care less about how the young lion spent his fortune. As for his mother, he was quite sure there must have been some kind of mistake the day he was born. Surely the mother he was meant to have was warm, kind, and loving lady. The old woman he visited each Sunday shared none of these attributes. Rather, he had a hunch she probably never wanted to bear a child in the first place. Not everyone is fit for parenting, after all. But these were all minor issues to him. The one thing that mattered, that he was profoundly grateful for, was the fact that he had been born into upper-class society. His mother had taught him that it was a sign of that his thoughts and views mattered more than most other people's, as he was the descendant of a noble lineage that was said to have once been related to royalty in the distant Middle Ages. This was a philosophy that had always kept him going even during the darkest times. His parents had squandered their opportunity, but he had a right to do as he pleased and change the world around him. His sort had been chosen to guide the rough and unruly masses that were the lower classes. Indeed, worthy people like him rightfully ruled the country. But there was one other aspect of himself Lysander couldn't seem to control, and had been fighting ever since that fateful day when Cedric had left, a feeling that had been gnawing at the back of his mind persistently. What he had come to realize was his own attraction to men. He'd been brought up to believe the very thought was not even an option, and that if it actually existed, it was disgusting and sinful. A vice most likely imported from lustful, unmanly countries such as France or Italy. But how could this be true? Surely there was a reason he felt this way. He wasn't a common tail-raiser, and the fact that he and Cedric were so inclined could not be a coincidence. He'd come to realize it was a sign. A sign they were meant for each other, and the fact that Coyote had been blinded by infatuation for a low-life fox was the main obstacle Lysander needed to overcome if he wanted to achieve his rightful goal. The sound of the organ began to grow distant, eventually fading away as he slid past the gate and down the oft-trod path, reaching his mother and father, who were already sitting in their carriage and quietly muttering to themselves. Lysander turned to the coachman as he boarded the vehicle. "Head southeast and drop me off in Hiddingstone, Monty. Then take my parents home." He sat down as the carriage began moving, pulling the silk curtain to avoid the strong sunlight shining through the foliage above. There were many wide trees on each side of the road they were taking. "Where did you say you were heading, Lysander?" "You heard me, Mata. Don't pretend otherwise," his father growled. "What the hell are you staying in Hillingstone for, boy?" "I think that is very much my own business," the old lion continued in a sarcastic tone. "I thought you said you'd hated these towns." Lysander turned to his mother, who had picked up a small book in the meantime. "And since when have you, or the Pater, ever been interested in what I'm doing?" "Don't talk nonsense. You know we care about you." The lion grumbled and crossed his arms as he sat back, making himself comfortable. "That would be a change." "I heard talk of a group of bandits lodging near that town, from Lady Bisley." Upon hearing this, Lysander wasn't able to contain a naughty grin. "I am well aware." "I'm not paying if they take you hostage, so stay out of trouble." The smile faded from Lysander's face. "I see it as only a matter of time before I get my post-Sunday mass lecture each week, isn't it?" "Don't say that, Lysander. You know we are uncommonly lenient with you." "How about you get back to that book of yours, mother?" "Another remark to your mother, and you're walking to Hillingstone, boy." "What about your friend? What is he up to? I haven't seen him in a while." Young Lion's eyes widened, as he obviously wasn't expecting this question. "Cedric? Oh, he is doing well." He paused briefly as he gathered his thoughts. "I'll be seeing him again soon, I expect." "I'm glad to hear so. You could learn some manners from him." "Ah, yes. You like that little soft-spoken Nancy boy, don't you?" Lysander felt his hands turn into fists. "I'd rephrase that if I were you." "Keep calm, boy. I meant no harm. I rather like him myself." And And with that, the old lion turned his attention to his wife as they began murmuring about mundane plans and useless gossip. This persisted for the remainder of the journey as Lysander kept quiet. He gazed out the window at the trees passing by, recalling the few times he and Cedric had gone picnicking in the woods. They needed to do so again soon, the moment the coyote was home again. He scowled as he shoved some dirtier thoughts that eventually followed this one to the back of his mind. He only spoke again to say goodbye to his parents once their carriage had reached Hiddenston. Then, picking up the small bag he used for traveling, he ploddingly strode down the main street, saluting the guards he passed along the way. It was barely twilight when Victor finally came to a halt in front of a wide oak tree. Cedric caught up a few seconds later, his legs beginning to ache after the sheer amount of walking and running earlier that day. The forest was almost eerily silent all around, except for the pleasant breeze, which was steadily growing stronger now that the sun had disappeared beyond the horizon. The coyote examined their surroundings and wearily spoke up after catching his breath. "What's the matter, V? Why have we stopped here?" Victor turned to look at his friend and smiled gently. "I think luck is on our side, Cedric. I found what we're looking for." Cedric noticed him confidently turn back to face the broad oak tree towering in front of them. "This is the largest tree in the forest. I'm sure I once heard that the residents of the town nearby affectionately refer to it as Hearn's Oak. You know, from Shakespeare's Twelfth Night." Cedric smiled at this unexpected literary reference from Victor. "I didn't know you were familiar with Shakespeare, V." He chuckled. "Though you might be mistaking Twelfth Night for the Merry Wives of Windsor." The fox waves his hand playfully. "Ah, that's what it was. Can't say I'm too familiar with them, to be honest. But I know someone who is." Victor took off his right glove, bringing his hands to his lips. This was soon followed by a loud and carefully timed 3-note whistle. Cedric almost jumped, not expecting this in the slightest, but he quickly realized what was happening. They must have finally reached the bandit camp the fox had excitedly told him about a few hours earlier. The two looked around, waiting to see if Victor's call had worked or if they'd stumbled their way into yet another dead end. The seconds seemed to pass at an agonizingly slow pace, as the forest around them grew even quieter. Victor turned his face to his friend once more, displaying an increasingly fatigued and defeated expression. "It would appear I was wrong after all." Suddenly, a loud rustling of leaves nearby caught their ears. Then, within seconds, a group of figures emerged from the bushes around them. It happened so quickly, the coyote didn't even have time to register exactly how many people made up this group. One of them rapidly lit a torch, whose sudden light was almost blinding to Cedric's eyes, now having grown accustomed to their dark surroundings. "Well, well, well. Look who we have here." As Coyote finally began to get a good view of these unfamiliar shapes, he noticed the animal holding the torch was a tall and notably muscular hyena. He was extremely imposing, his sole appearance commanding everyone's attention. The clothes this hyena was wearing were almost immediately noticeable. A pair of cream-colored breeches and white stockings covered his legs, his shoes black with shiny silver buckles and a bright red heels. However, the most unusual item by far was the purple robe he was carrying over his left shoulder that flowed down and tied around his waist, clearly resembling a Roman toga, Above it was a red bandana matching the color of his heels. To complete the look, the hyena was wearing a floral crown made up of various leaves, flowers, and petals, mirroring his poetic Apollonian appearance. Victor smiled confidently.
It's good to see you, Dion.
The hyena replied in a low, almost growling tone.
I can't believe of all people you would show your ugly face again.
The fox almost took a step back at this remark. He then gave a worried reply.
Look, I'm sure we can be reasonable about this.
Cedric's heart began to beat faster. Was Victor in trouble? Hadn't he said he and the other bandits were firm friends? Without warning, the hyena and Victor burst out laughing as they fondly embraced. The other two, whose faces Cedric could now discern more clearly, also couldn't help but smile at the scene.
It's wonderful to see you again, you fool.
Welcome back, Vic. What a lovely surprise. Cedric sighed, relieved as this was just a joke that his friend had been playing along. The fox turned to face the other bandits once he had caught his breath again. As he did, so did Cedric, curiously gazing at these other two animals. The closest one to where he was standing was a Doberman, lean but in good shape with dark and silky short fur. He was wearing what looked like a soldier's uniform. Though it was unlike those of the soldiers Cedric and Victor had been forced to hide from during the past few days, the coyote thought to himself, he concluded this must be a much older, dating from at least 50 years earlier. What made this even stranger was the fact that the Doberman himself only seemed to be in his late 20s. Cedric thus assumed there must have been quite the tale behind this particular item of clothing. The other bandit standing a few steps away from the dog was a handsome sun bear. The coyote realized he never actually met someone of this particular species, so he observed them with a naive curiosity. The clothes the bear was wearing were rather worn out, yet very elegantly combined. Along them he brandished a rifle and a rapier, paired off with some polished hunting boots. These bandits certainly cared about their appearance, the coyote thought to himself.
How have you been, lads? Where are the others?
Dion interrupted Victor, speaking in a much lighter tone than earlier. Cedric noticed the hyena had a rather elegant upper-class accent, as well as a precise theatrical way of enunciating his words.
We should be asking the questions here, you rascal. Let's save the casual conversation for later. What are you doing here, my boy? Are you in need of any assistance?
Then he quickly turned to face Cedric properly for the first time, eyes widening with intrigue.
I see you've begun to associate yourself with a different sort of crowd. Who might this dashing gentleman be? This is my childhood best friend, Cedric. We've essentially been on the run for the last couple days. It's a long and fascinating story, but I'd rather be narrating our misadventures around a warm fire and accompanied by something to eat, if that's not asking too much. Of course, my good fellow. Follow me. I'll lead you both to the camp. Hollis will treat you to a hearty dinner.
He turned and firmly shook Cedric's hand.
And it's a pleasure to meet you, Cedric.
The coyote gave a short and awkward reply. Likewise, sir.
I already like the lad.
He turned and gave Victor a knowing look, as if they were privy to something Cedric wasn't, before turning his attention back to the coyote.
My name's Dion, short for Dionysus.
Victor giggled.
Stage name, more like.
Dion turned to face him with the blankest expression he could muster.
What would you rather be calling me? I absolutely despise my birth name. I'd rather be dragged through the city streets tied to a cart than have that used against me.
The hyena began walking, holding the torch above his head as the others followed suit. Victor rested his hand on the older bandit's shoulder.
I'm just fooling around, Dion. You forget who's providing the food this evening, and such insults to the group's leader will not be taken lightly. I see your theatrical outbursts haven't changed at all since our last meeting.
As the group made their way through the muddy ground and thick undergrowth, Cedric felt a few branches pinch and scratch the sides of his legs. He needed to change a wardrobe once they got to this camp, but his current suit and breeches weren't going to hold up much longer.
When was our last meeting? It seems so long ago.
The Doberman spoke up from behind them with a slight northern accent.
We saw Vicar a year ago at least. Must have been mugging that old posh wanker. Which one? Those are all we rob. The one with a scowl and mug that even a mother would have trouble loving. Still yet to ring a bell.
The Sun Bear chimed in, hoping to clarify his friend's words. I believe they were the one who was embezzling from the orphanage.
Oh, Sanderson? That would make sense. Aye, Blake's right. After that, you all decided to move and set up camp elsewhere. But I still didn't feel ready to leave my home county yet.
I assume that's not the case anymore.
Again, it's a long story. I'll explain everything once we get to the... Here we are!
The group came to a halt, having now reached a clearing in the forest. Cedric could see a lit campfire a few feet away, surrounded by some wide tents standing beside a aging carriage, which the bandits were seemingly using to store food and drink. Judging by the shine of the bottles, he could discern on the inside. The hyena lifted his right hand to his mouth and bellowed.
We have returned, boys. Come, feast your eyes upon who we have found near Hearn's Oak.
A couple of figures emerged from behind one of the tents as the coyote heard one of them reply excitedly.
Is that Victor?
The bandit rushed towards them and warmly embraced the fox. Victor laughed cheerfully.
Hollis, my favorite feline. What a pleasure to see you again.
The bandit in question was tall and broad tiger, whose height was only surpassed by Dion's. He was wearing what looked like an old dark red overcoat, along with a leather belt with a small dagger tied to one side. At first sight, he seemed the friendliest of all the bandits, greeting Victor with a warm and welcoming tone. As the tiger let go, he turned to face the coyote, much like Dion had done earlier.
And who's this fella you've brought with you?
Victor cleared his throat now that all the bandits were positioned in a circle surrounding the two friends.
I think some introductions are at hand. Lads, this is my best friend Cedric, a charming and kind soul, as well as a terrifically talented artiste.
The coyote rolled his eyes at the last remark.
Oh, please, V.
Not this again. The others greeted him merrily.
Cedric, you've already met Dion, the leader of this parcel of rogues.
The fox took a few steps toward the bandit standing to his left.
This handsome devil is Hollis, Their very own bartender.
The tiger held out his arm and gently shook Cedric's hand, speaking in a sweet southwestern accent.
Pleasure. It's very exciting to meet a friend of Victor's.
Pleasure's all mine. The coyote smiled shyly as he attempted to make conversation. I don't think I've ever heard of a tiger bartender before. Hollis cheerfully replied.
No? Why, my whole families are bartenders, as well as many others I've met. I assure you we're no rarity.
And along with him, I should also introduce you to his faithful carriage.
Aye, she's a sturdy one. I've been using her to store our food and drink supplies for donkey's years. Speaking of which, let me go and cook something for you both. I assume you're hungry.
To be completely honest, I would kill for some food right now.
I'd kill for much less.
The others chuckled, but Victor swiftly answered the Doberman.
Easy now. No need to scare Cedric already.
The fox faced his friend once again.
This moody fellow is Blake. He puts up a stern facade, but you'll learn to love him.
And I do enjoy scaring the newcomers.
This is true. Before Victor could elaborate further, the sun bear Cedric had been curiously eyeing on his way to the camp, walked up to him and shook his hand.
Hello, Cedric. I'm Ridley. And those are some very stylish clothes you're wearing.
The coyote smiled awkwardly, as he hadn't been expecting this comment. He brushed some of the dirt off his suit and replied, Oh, thank you. They're not in great shape, as you can see.
I can help you with that. I take care of mending everyone's garments here. Just let me know if you need anything, and I'll gladly assist you.
Victor playfully crossed his arms.
I see Ridley hasn't bothered to wait for an introduction.
Frankly, Vic, I've heard enough people tell me who I am to last me a lifetime. I'd rather introduce myself.
Of course, I understand.
And don't forget, there's one more of us you need to introduce.
Why, yes. How could I?
Victor walked up to a short and chubby house cat, dressed in elegant formal clothes and wearing an old powdered wig. Cedric was very surprised this was the least bandit-looking person out of the whole bunch. In fact, he wouldn't have seemed out of place behind a marble counter in a city bank.
This is Selwyn, one of the toughest criminals I've met.
The cat grew red in the face, replying with a deep voice.
Oh, hush, Victor. Enough of your bullying. I was serious.
As the fox turned toward his friend, Dion chimed in on the conversation again.
You see, our Selwyn used to be an accountant. Then one day he realized his life was going absolutely nowhere. So he decided to embark on a grand adventure. He stole all the company's finances, leaving his old life forever and joining our merry gang.
This hit close to home, as Cedric realized his life story sounded incredibly similar to Selwyn's on a surface level. He wondered what fate might have befallen him had he not decided to leave his hometown.
That makes me sound so much too interesting. Prepare to be disappointed, Cedric. I forgot to mention he's usually all doom and gloom.
Dion and the others, including the cat, all laughed at this remark.
I won't dispute that.
A short time later, the group were all sitting around the campfire, eating the delicious beef Hollis had cooked for them. The tiger jokingly scolded Selwyn as he served the cat his portion.
I prepared this for Vic and Cedric's cell, and that means no extras.
All right. I didn't say I wanted any.
I can read your body language, you rogue.
Cedric tasted his meal, resisting the urge to gobble it down rapidly. Regardless of how hungry he was, he needed to enjoy this food properly. He smiled as he recalled that was some of the advice Lysander's Aunt Jane always used to give before mealtimes. The old lady might have been a bit of a nutter, but a broken clock is still right twice a day. Lysander was very impressed at how tasty the meat was, and how well the sauce accompanied it. Hollis must have served some wonderful meals in the tavern he used to work in, he thought. This is really good.
Thank you, Cedric. I'm afraid it's not perfect.
I wanted to get it done as quickly as I could, cause I knew you boys were ravenous.
No need to excuse yourself. It's fantastic. I'm glad to hear the meal is appreciated. However, I'd be very curious to learn more about our two guests this evening, our young coyote friend in particular. Whom have we heard so much about over the years, I might add?
That last statement came as a big surprise to Cedric. The more he thought about it, it made sense Victor had spoken about him to the bandits previously. It was rather touching to think of, as well as proof that the fox had kept thinking about his childhood friend over the years. He began to tell the full story of how he and Cedric first became friends, following it with a shortened list of all the events that had befallen the two since.
Okay, I am going to call it there. So we just got introducing ourselves to everyone. I'm gonna say I like Selwyn the most. Oh my gosh. I mean, he kind of resonates with the main character because he kind of did the same thing, except he stole from a bank. Probably more money, to be honest. So easily flippable return. Smart guy. I like Selwyn. Yeah. I'm excited to see where this is going, but yeah, I don't think my voice can take much more. I'm out of practice. But yeah, this has been Fritz-Ay, and everyone have a nice day. Ciao.